Welcome back, fellow mitochondriacs, for another episode of Cancer as a Mitochondrial Metabolic Disease. Today, we are going to be talking about a couple of very important compounds that are going to help in our fight against cancer, but more specifically, in getting our glucose ketone index down to where we need it to be. And those two compounds are going to be resveratrol and milk thistle. But I'm going to take a little bit of a time at the beginning to discuss sulforaphane and its potential, but also its limitations due to lack of literature on the subject, which really sucks because it seems like there's really a lot of potential with sulforaphane in cancer as a whole, but in particular for this particular part of the cancer as a metabolic disease, which is improving our blood glucose. It's kind of stealing away glucose away from the cancer cells and improving our glucose ketone index, which is really the foundation to metabolic therapy. So let's, without further ado, get into today's video here. Okay, so this paper was published in 2024 in June, and it was titled Unveiling the Nutritional Veil of Sulforaphane with a major focus on glucose homeostasis modulation. And it says here that abnormal glucose homeostasis is associated with metabolic syndromes, including cardiovascular diseases, hypertension, type 2 diabetes mellitus, and obesity, highlighting the significance of maintaining balanced glucose levels for optimal biologic function. This highlights the importance of maintaining normal glucose levels for proper biologic functioning. Sulforaphane, the primary bioactive compound in broccoli from the Cruciferae or Brassiculae family, has been shown to enhance glucose homeostasis effectively while exhibiting low cytotoxicity. This paper addresses or assesses the impact of sulforaphane on glucose homeostasis in vitro, in vivo, and human trials. I'm not really sure how they did that, but I'll digress there. As well as the human molecular mechanisms that drive its regulatory effects. New strategies have been proposed to enhance the bioavailability and targeted delivery of sulforaphane in order to overcome inherent instability. This manuscript, or the manuscript, also covers the safety evaluations of sulforaphane that have been documented for its production and utilization. Hence, a deeper understanding of the favorable influence and mechanism of sulforaphane on glucose homeostasis, coupled with the fact that sulforaphane is abundant in the human daily diet, or is potentially abundant. I don't think a lot of people are eating a lot of cruciferous vegetables on average, but I think it's got the potential to be abundant in the human diet, may ultimately offer theoretical evidence to support its potential use in the food and pharmaceutical industries. And I picked this paper because it had unbelievable graphics in addition to, it's on target with our topic here. And again, this paper was published in June of 2024, so really recent. And, it's basically showing here that when it comes to impaired glucose homeostasis, high blood glucose, high blood glucose, high insulin, we have generally too much glucose production, too much gluconeogenesis. We're in an insulin resistant state. It's also kind of, highly associated with oxidative stress and inflammation. And then because of the oxidative stress and inflammation and the high need for output, the insulin secretion is lacking because the pancreatic beta cells, or the cells that are actually in the pancreas that make insulin and release insulin on basically a second by second need, are damaged. So therefore, the insulin secretion is not up to par. There's decreased insulin sensitivity at the level of the pancreas, decreased glucose uptake, glucose intolerance, and decreases in hepatic glycogen or glucose storage in the liver itself. So this is kind of like the hallmarks of impaired glucose homeostasis and kind of a pre-diabetes, diabetes type situation, and involves multiple systems. And then when sulforaphane is added, then basically what they're saying is that you're able to then have better glucose homeostasis by doing kind of the opposite of what's happening when there's pathology, right? There's lowered glucose production, lower gluconeogenesis, less insulin resistance, less oxidative stress, inflammation. And because of that, because of these things, then there's improved insulin secretion, insulin sensitivity, glucose uptake, hepatic glycogen synthesis, et cetera, which allows more balance in the system. I think a couple of other interesting things is that there's an enzyme called myrinase, and as well as the gut microbiota, which are involved in this process. So the next cool graphic that this paper has is that anywhere you see a red with a kind of a stop sign here is where sulforaphane is having an inhibitory action, and whenever you see an arrow that's got an actual point on it, that would be increasing it. So we see here that sulforaphane is lowering the amount of hepatic glucose production and lowering insulin resistance. It's going to actually enhance glucose uptake, insulin signaling, fatty acid oxidation, and glycogen levels in the liver itself. And then within the pancreas, it's going to increase glucagon and hepatic glucose production when needed. And at the same time, it's going to actually have effects on glucose production as well as insulin production, as well as improving insulin resistance. And, some other things that are important for this is increasing glucose uptake. We've seen several compounds have this effect where it either increases, glucose transporters, or it actually increases the ability of insulin to do its job, both at the receptor level and downstream. And then it also has effects on mitochondrial biogenesis, or increasing mitochondrial number and function to be able to burn the extra glucose, and then glucose aerobic oxidation, or the use of glucose as fuel through oxidative phosphorylation with the help of oxygen, right? So multiple pathways in which sulforaphane has positive effects. And the next pretty cool graphic is kind of just talking about where does sulforaphane come from, right? So we see that in micrograms per gram quantity of this particular food, we see that broccoli has, it looks like 16 to 57. Cabbage actually has more at 41 to 177, which was kind of interesting. Brussels sprouts have anywhere from 336 to 1483. Wow, that's unbelievable. I was unaware that Brussels sprouts were so much higher than broccoli. We always think sulforaphane, we always think broccoli, but let's see, cabbage and Brussels sprouts have even more than the other cruciferous vegetables. And then things looks like beets and bok choy have relatively low levels, and then cauliflower being kind of cauliflower and kale kind of being in the middle there with 4 to 12, 4 to 9, as in terms of the amount per gram of actual food, right? So looks like your biggest bang for the buck to get sulforaphane would be Brussels sprouts. Now, I wish I would have had broccoli sprouts on here, because I'm pretty sure broccoli sprouts have like orders of magnitude more sulforaphane than mature broccoli, but it's not on this particular graphic. So again, this is a fairly recent paper, right? June 2024, saying all the amazing things and all the molecular mechanisms in which broccoli, or I should say sulforaphane, coming from cruciferous vegetables, is able to improve glucose homeostasis. And then when you actually do the work of searching PubMed, now this is a PubMed search that's within the past 5 years, we see zero studies that were published looking at A1C or blood glucose. And I think that's pretty discouraging because, again, they're talking about in this particular abstract all the human trials that have been put together to look at sulforaphane's actions on blood glucose in June of 2024. But when you actually look at the literature for the last 5 years, there's nothing published or nothing that comes up when you look at sulforaphane and A1C. Now, if you actually select 10 years here, one paper comes up, and it's this paper here titled Sulforaphane Reduces Hepatic Glucose Production and Improves Glucose Control in Patients with Type 2 Diabetes mellitus. And what's really frustrating about this particular paper is that, it's at that, the bottom line is that sulforaphane provided as concentrated broccoli sprout extract reduced fasting blood glucose, reduced glycosylated hemoglobin in obese patients with dysregulated type 2 diabetes. Okay, that's pretty cool. So we know it has an effect. I mean, obviously these graphics suggest it's going to have a very strong effect given its molecular mechanisms. However, this paper, if you actually try to go to the publisher, it's locked and you can't see it without paying $35. So I don't have the actual amount of glucose that it lowers, nor the glycosylated hemoglobin. And, there's another paper that was published in 2017, and it was basically looking at this paper. Okay. It's just kind of an abstract of that paper. It was published in Nature Reviews Endocrinology. And it gives us a little more insight to the potential results that were found in this paper. And it says to investigate the possible gluconeogenic effect of sulforaphane, these rat hepatoma cells were treated with the compound, aka sulforaphane. Compared to control, sulforaphane at 3 micromoles suppressed glucose production by 41%, which was dependent on the translocation of nuclear factor erythroid 2 related factor 2, which is NRF2, to the nucleus, and decrease expression of genes encoding for key enzymes involved in gluconeogenesis. Later on, it says, remarkably, sulforaphane suppressed hepatic glucose production and improved glucose tolerance by a similar magnitude of metformin. So metformin is one of the most well-known pharmaceuticals in this kind of area of medicine, being kind of a gold standard kind of first line treatment for pharmaceuticals when it comes to glucose intolerance, prediabetes, and diabetes. And it gives sulforaphane high marks, saying that it's as effective as metformin in this particular study that's locked behind a paywall. And later on, it says here that daily intake of broccoli sprout extract for 12 weeks reduced fasting reduced fasting blood levels of glucose and improved hemoglobin A1C in patients with poorly controlled diabetes mellitus type 2 and obesity with a BMI of greater than 30. So we're kind of left with, a lot of, well, that could be great. The only real hard numbers we've got were this suppressed hepatic, or liver glucose production by 41%, which seems to be a lot. And it has a magnitude of suppressing glucose production as well as glucose tolerance, the same as metformin. So at this point, we kind of have to speculate, well, what does that actually mean for us? Where does the rubber meet the road here? Well, I had to pull papers on the effects of metformin on A1C. And so this was the most recent paper published in 2012 that looked at metformin's effects, and it was titled Effect of Metformin Glycinate on Glycosylated Hemoglobin, A1C, Concentration, and Insulin Sensitivity in Drug-Naive Adult Patients with Type 2 Diabetes mellitus. And it showed here that there was a significant difference in changes from the baseline A1C for placebo and metformin glycinate groups, respectively. A reductions in greater than 1%, either 1 or greater than 1%, A1C was reached in 60% of the patients by metformin administration. And it showed here an average of about 1.0% of A1C, which is a very strong effect. Going from 7% to 6% or 6% to 5% would be a huge amount of A1C improvement. And if we were able to go back to what that would look like on a graph, that means let's say hypothetically your A1C was 7.5%, and you went to 6.5, that would be a 29 point reduction in your blood glucose, fasting blood glucose, which would be pretty good, or average blood glucose really would be a better way of saying it. So it's significant, A1C. And so at this point, because of the data, the lack of data, I should say, although we have very pretty graphics, we have molecular mechanisms that likely prove its efficacy, we don't have a lot of studies on this. But in this particular study, and in this study talking about this study, it's showing that it has effects similar to that of metformin. So I would, you're going to expect somewhere between probably 0.5 and a 1%. And in some cases, probably if you have really bad diabetes, maybe even a greater than 1% decrease in your A1C from sulforaphane. Although, again, that is kind of a speculation based off of the data we have. And I don't like speculation, so I would love more studies to be published. These researchers need to get on the ball here with sulforaphane and getting some published data, maybe some meta-analyses that are able to give us better hard numbers. But the best we can do right now is speculate. And given that A1Cs change about 1% for metformin, we're going to probably try to expect about a 1% change from sulforaphane. Now, again, I wanted to also look at what about some of these other newer agents onto metformin. Well, again, this paper published in December of 2016 shows that most add-on therapies to metformin have similar effects on A1C. So if you take metformin and you add glipizide, you're going to have about another 1% decrease in A1C. So all of the other, drugs, whether they're newer drugs or, are going to have about a 1% A1C reduction as well. So just wanted to put that in there. Kind of showing the effectiveness of some of these natural things compared to their pharmacologic kind of counterparts. Now going into resveratrol, where we have a lot more hard data, which is really good. So this paper, which published in 2017, is titled "Role of Resveratrol in the Management of Insulin Resistance and Related Conditions: Mechanisms of Action." So I'd like to start out with mechanisms, so we kind of know how these things work. So resveratrol, a well-known antioxidant, is present in numerous plant species and as a result is obtained easily through dietary intake of plant-based foods and beverages. Several studies suggest that resveratrol has anti-carcinogenic, antimicrobial, and antiviral effects. It may also have beneficial metabolic parameters or properties that result in mitigation of insulin resistance and related metabolic abnormalities, including dyslipidemia, hyperglycemia, and hyperinsulinemia through regulation of gene expression or the activity of rate-limiting enzymes. A large body of evidence supports the beneficial effects of resveratrol in the management of and treatment of insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, and related complications through a multitude of mechanisms. So in this particular paper, it shows a graphic here that is showing resveratrol at the top and then normalized insulin action here, right? So the way it does it is taking kind of a three-pronged approach. And it shows here within the muscle, this is what this is signifying. The muscle, it increases antioxidant enzymes, it decreases reactive oxygen species and inflammation, and decreases mitochondrial damage. And the liver, it increases antioxidant enzymes, reduces reactive oxygen species and inflammation. And within the pancreas, which what this is signifying, it increases antioxidant enzymes, decreases reactive oxygen species, decreases inflammation, and decreases beta cell failure. So the beta cells, again, are the cells that are actually responsible for creating and releasing insulin when it's supposed to be released. And therefore, it has a normalizing action on insulin. Going further into mechanisms, in this particular paper titled "Resveratrol Metabolic Syndrome and Gut Microbiota," it was published in 2018. It says here that even though resveratrol is partially metabolized by gut microbiota, the relevance of this forgotten organ has not been widely considered. However, it is in the past few years, data has emerged suggesting that the therapeutic potential of this compound may be due to its interaction with the gut microbiota, reporting changes in bacterial composition associated with beneficial metabolic outcomes. So I'm going to digress here just for a second. So one of the reasons why I'm not as concerned about why some of these phytochemical compounds don't digest well or get absorbed well into the bloodstream is because it's pretty clear that a lot of these compounds, cinnamon, berberine, garlic, resveratrol, sulforaphane, have at least part of their action on the colonic flora, okay, the bacteria in the colon. So if we were to absorb 100% of resveratrol, we may be missing out on a lot of beneficial effects for resveratrol or other compounds. So that's why, like, when people are concerned about, I mean, the classic one is curcumin, right, or berberine, when they're not being absorbed 100% into the bloodstream to have their effects in the bloodstream. And they have numerous effects in the bloodstream. Don't get me wrong. And I think that there could be benefits in particular to some of these compounds being administered like via IV to get high serum concentrations to have its effects in the bloodstream. I'm not trying to minimize those, but I also don't want to ignore what seems to be a common theme here when talking about all these flavonoids is that they have profound effects within the gastrointestinal tract itself, whether it be affecting enzymes that are responsible for breaking down glucose and allowing it to be absorbed in its more simple form, or its effects on the gut microbiome. And if we were to absorb 100% of these compounds, because we're so kind of obsessed with getting it into the bloodstream, we're missing out on a lot of those benefits. And I don't think that we should be throwing the baby out with the bathwater and ignoring these facts. So I'll digress back onto our topic here at hand. So resveratrol, when it's taken up into this is a gut lumen, the small intestine, you see that it's starting to interact with the gut microbiome, and it acts as a prebiotic. So it gets eaten by these gut microbiota, and then it gets changed into other chemicals, which have beneficial effects not only in the local environment on the epithelial cells in the small intestine and the colon, but also getting absorbed into the bloodstream as different compounds altogether, which have other beneficial effects, which we can't really account for from just from resveratrol by itself, right? And then if you see here, it also gets taken up into the bloodstream and gets changed by our cytochrome system and our detoxifying enzymes into other, it's being gluconated and sulfated and et cetera. And then it's going to get back into the gut lumen through the bile and then have other effects on gut microbiota to become kind of instead of it being a vicious cycle, it becomes kind of like a friendly cycle or a friendly snowball of beneficial effects through all these different compounds that are created and used by the body. So it's a pretty unbelievable system, really. And again, this is just highlighting resveratrol, but we've seen this throughout multiple, things, looking at sulforaphane microbiota, right? Having effects on acting as a kind of a prebiotic. And, I think a lot of us think of prebiotics as being fiber, but really a lot of the pigmented compounds within foods, the heavily pigmented, colored compounds within foods also act as prebiotics and help grow out specific microbacteria. This is just another graphic within the same paper showing resveratrol interacting with the gut microbiome, or resveratrol precursors acting with the gut microbiome to be changed to resveratrol, or resveratrol being changed to other gut-derived resveratrol metabolites, having other effect, again, prebiotic effect, right? And then affecting metabolic syndrome as a whole, right? Lowering inflammation, improving gut barrier function, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and kind of like resetting the entire system. And although, classical functional medicine would say that, or integrative medicine would say that health begins in the gut, I do think that there's a lot of truth to that. I think that I also agree with what Dr. Cruz says, no, health begins with circadian biology. I think there's a lot of truth to both of those things, and I think they can be mutually beneficial. Absolutely. I don't think that throwing out either one of those is a good idea. But specifically talking about the gut microbiome, there's a lot still left to be learned, but resveratrol and other phytochemicals and flavonoids seem to have a highly beneficial effect on the microbiome, which then through other mechanisms of actions improves our metabolic health, And obviously, specifically, we're talking about diabetes. So the next paper I pulled was titled Resveratrol in Treating Diabetes and Its Cardiovascular Complications, a review of its mechanisms of action. And this is a paper published in May of 2022. And it says resveratrol, a plant-derived polyphenolic compound with pleiotropic protective effects, ranging from antioxidant and anti-inflammatory to hypoglycemic effects. Recent studies strongly suggest that the consumption of resveratrol offers protection against diabetes and its cardiovascular complications. The protective effects of resveratrol involve the regulation and multiple signaling pathways, including inhibition of oxidative stress and inflammation, enhanced insulin sensitivities, induction of autophagy, regulation of lipid metabolism, promotion of GLUT transporters, expression, translocation, and activation of the SIRT1 AMPK signaling axis. So again, the word pleiotropic is something that I think is hard to wrap our head around, right? Like when we think about pharmacology, we think about, let me just talk about one that's most people know about, statins, right? It has effects on HMG-CoA, right? Reductase, the enzyme that's going to help lower cholesterol, which may or may not be a good thing. I'll digress on that. But it has other effects, right, that may or may not be good. Well, a lot of these compounds, such as resveratrol, sulforaphane, cinnamon, berberine, etc., also have pleiotropic effects, effects on multiple systems. That's why they have graphics like this, for example, where you have resveratrol, having effects on multiple pathways, right? So since we're talking about that, let's go down to this graphic. This is the graphic associated with this paper. And you're seeing here that it has effects, enhancing effects on AMPK, which is a key signaling nutrient sensor pathway, as well as SIRT1. And, this is kind of ancient history at this point, but when we were starting the Cancers and Metabolic Disease series, I was talking about the reason behind why a ketogenic diet, as well as calorie restriction, has positive effects on cancer. And if you remember way back to that video, me talking about ketogenic diets, and I pulled a paper from Dr. Seyfried's group, and it was saying that although the glucose lowering effects of a ketogenic diet and calorie restriction are a major beneficial effect, it wasn't thought of to be as the main effect. It was actually the effects on some of these signaling cascades, such as insulin, as well as nutrient sensors such as AMPK and the sirtuin system, that are able to put us in a state that kind of normalizes our metabolism and shuts down a lot of the pseudohypoxia drivers. The low AMPK and low sirtuin, as well as high insulin and high inflammation, can all enhance pseudohypoxia. And that pseudohypoxia through the hypoxia-inducible factor 1 alpha and 2 alpha gene products and transcription factors can then upregulate all of the hallmarks of cancer, as well as the Warburg metabolism. So when we're able to, through diet, exercise, as well as beneficial compounds such as resveratrol, as well as many others, of course, we've talked about, have effects on AMPK and sirtuins, as well as blocking inflammatory states and improving insulin resistance, we are shutting down the drivers of cancer, essentially, right? Like we are behind the Warburg effect is things that are driving that, right? And when we're able to shut down a lot of those levers of power that drive the Warburg metabolism, we're doing more good for ourselves than just starving the cancer of glucose and glutamine, although that is absolutely required. And so you can see here that AMPK, sirtuins, also have effects on, again, the glucose transporters. These are insulin pro-growth pathways. PGC1 alpha is the main, kind of signaling cascade for mitochondrial biogenesis. And these all kind of coalesce, okay, to lower inflammation, lower oxidative stress, again, within normal cells, improve autophagy, decrease insulin resistance, as well as improve glucose uptake. And what we're essentially doing by kind of wielding these levers of power is we're able to then allow the rest of the body to bring it to take in glucose like it's supposed to, what's left in the bloodstream. Of course, we want it to be as low as possible by doing other things. But when we are able to allow the rest of the body to soak up glucose, okay, effectively, we are going to act as a deterrent against cancer, because cancer is trying to take as much glucose to the system as possible. And when we allow the rest of the body, through exercise, through other things, through activations of these chemical cascades, we're able to then create a competitive battle where the muscle cells and the liver cells are able to compete against the cancer cells, and therefore allow for less substrate to the cancer cells so they can't have uncontrolled growth and power that Warburg effect, which is a variety of vicious cycles. This other paper that was titled Implications of Resveratrol on Glucose Uptake and Metabolism, it says here that we review alternatives that can be exploited to improve cancer therapies, include the use of other polyphenols in combination of resveratrol with other molecules, and their impact on glucose homeostasis in cancer and diabetes. And it's just showing that when we increase glucose uptake and insulin signaling, okay, for the normal cells, what we're essentially doing is we're stealing the glucose away from these cancer cells, which then shuts down their glucose uptake, their glucose metabolism, and they die, right? They have cell death because they can't maintain themselves if they don't have glucose. And what all these chemicals are doing is that they're having positive effects on the normal cells, and they're having negative effects on cancer specifically, which is pretty unbelievable and awesome at the same time. But looking at kind of where the rubber meets the road, what happens when we take resveratrol, and what effects does it have on A1C, blood glucose, etc.? And in this particular randomized controlled trial, there was a total of 472 elderly patients with type 2 diabetes, and they were broken into a placebo group and into a resveratrol group. And even though the abstract didn't give us specific numbers, I do want to read the results. So resveratrol treatment greatly improved glucose metabolism, insulin tolerance, and insulin metabolism compared to placebo. Resveratrol relieved symptoms through enhancing nutrient sensing systems, AMPK, sirtuins, etc., which in turn reduce production and activity of glucose 6 phosphatase. Compared to placebo, resveratrol treatment significantly decreased pro-inflammatory cytokines, glycated hemoglobin, hemoglobin A1C, interleukin 6, tumor necrosis factor alpha, interleukin 1 beta. These are all inflammatory cytokines. And in the elderly diabetes, I'm guessing they meant diabetics. Resveratrol treatment decreased blood glucose parameters, improved the lipid profile, total cholesterol, LDL, HDL, triglycerides, and renal function compared to the placebo as well. So it's showing that it's kind of attacking metabolic syndrome as a whole, not just the insulin resistance and blood glucose. And a lot of these papers are looking at kind of like a whole cardiometabolic kind of from a holistic cardiometabolic perspective, which, is not that it's not important. It's important as can be. It's just that we're specifically in these videos looking at how it's affecting our blood glucose so it can affect our GKI, right? So again, it's not immediate, although there is seemingly a fairly immediate effect. After 2 months, we have some improvements there. So the average of the A1Cs in these two groups was about 9.2, 9.3%. And at the end of the study, it lowered their A1C to the mid 7s. So it had a profound effect on A1C. I mean, we're talking about a 1 point. I mean, it's all speculatory because I don't have the exact numbers, unfortunately, but it looks like it's less than 7.5. So we're talking about a near 2% decrease in A1C in this particular study with these elderly diabetics that had pretty poorly controlled diabetes if they're starting at 9.2%. And then what we're seeing here is, let's see here, MCN. I'm trying to see what MCR. Well, I'm not sure what this MCN is trying to represent here. I'm actually not sure. Milliliters per kilogram per minute. I'm not sure. But that being said, the parameters that I was really concerned about was the A1C. And, let's just say hypothetically, the study showed a 2% decrease in A1C. Going back to our handy dandy calculator here, let's say hypothetically we were at 9.2% and average blood glucose of 217, which is pretty bad. And we went down to like 7.5 or 7.4. We're talking about a 40 to 60 milligrams per deciliter decrease in blood glucose just from resveratrol. So it seems to be pretty darn powerful. And I think that resveratrol has got a lot of potential. Now, newer studies, in particular, this 2022 August study, and again, this was looking at hemoglobin A1C in a variety of age groups as well as a variety of dosages. It showed here that in these 45 to 60-year-old patients, 45 to 59-year-old to be exact, if you had less than 250 milligrams per day, it lowered your blood glucose on average 8.64. If you did 250 to 500, it went up to 22.2 blood glucose on average, right? Lower. And if you did 500 to 1,000, it decreased by 28.4 milligrams per deciliter. So had a very substantial effect on blood glucose. When they looked at the A1C in this particular systemic review and meta-analysis in 2022, it was on average about 0.6%. So it's got a good effects. Now, I just want to be very transparent here. It showed the best effect in these patients that were 45 to 59 years old with this effect. In this particular meta-analysis, they didn't see as much of an effect people who were above 60 years old. But we have to really get into the nitty-gritty here, because when you have a study like this where you have elderly patients, 472 patients in a 6-month period, and it lowered their A1C by nearly 2%. There's something to that as well, and that needs to be scrutinized. But it seems as if there can be, at minimum, a 0.6% average blood glucose, average A1C decrease with sulforaphane in this medium dose, which is 250 to 500 per day. It did not say if this was, the all trans, resveratrol. I would have to look into the literature even further to see if it was a racemic mixture of what type of resveratrol they were using in these studies, because we know that the trans resveratrol is stronger than the one that has the more racemic mixture. But anyway, my point is that resveratrol seems to have a very strong effect on hemoglobin A1C in the literature. Now, to finish out this particular talk, we're going to talk about simulaurin and milk thistle. Okay. And for me, milk thistle was a bit of a sleeper. I did not expect it to have probably the most profound effects on blood glucose than anything we've looked at so far. And so therefore, it's pretty exciting for me to share it. And before I get to that point, let me take a look at some of these comments here. My father has been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and is doing great with the help of 100,000 IU of D per day, 1 gram of resveratrol, 800 milligrams of milk thistle, and 1.5 grams of berberine, 800 milligrams of sulforaphane. That's really great. His doctor cannot believe it, recommends everyone using those compounds. Yeah, I mean, that's a really high amount of vitamin D per day. I would really like to see, are they checking his vitamin D levels, and are they checking his calcium levels? I would be concerned about that. But that's unbelievable. I'm so glad your dad is doing well with pancreatic cancer with really such little amount of intervention. Vitamin D, resveratrol, milk thistle, berberine, and sulforaphane. That's awesome. Good morning to you as well. Life Extension sells a sulforaphane with myronase supplement, which I take every morning, but I also grow and eat my own broccoli sprouts, which have the highest concentrations of sulforaphane. I would be curious to see what the concentration of sulforaphane is within broccoli sprouts. I do know it's significantly higher than than broccoli, like the mature broccoli. But remember, we saw that graphic showed that like Brussels sprouts were like an order of magnitude higher than like 10 times higher than broccoli. So I'd be curious to see how that compares to Brussels sprouts. Interesting you mentioned milk thistle. I am enrolled in a study drug that one of the prerequisites is to stop taking milk thistle. Oh, God. Sorry to hear that. Is keto diet with high fat okay with ovarian as it feeds mostly on fats? So a ketogenic diet by nature is a high fat diet. Remember, it's a low carbohydrate, ultra low carbohydrate diet. It's a low protein diet as well. It's a high fat diet. And all cancer does not feed, cancer cannot feed on fat, unfortunately. It can maybe utilize fats to make other fats, but it can't feed on fats. The Warburg effect is only using glucose. And then cancer can also ferment glutamine as well, but not fat. I made the coach for Jose, a Mexican singer diagnosed with pancreatic cancer who survived more than 6 months than the oncologist said. He survived more than the 6 months the oncologist said. Look, oncologists and no doctor is God. Okay, they don't know how long you're going to live. So, everyone asks the question to doctors, and it's the worst possible question you can ask someone is how long are you going to live? And I think that they try to do their best of what they know based off of their understanding, but don't look at it as a hard expiration date because no one knows, right? All right, so let's get back to business here, looking at milk thistle. So this paper is titled "Mechanistic Insights into the Pharmacologic Significance of Simulaurin," and it was published in August 2022. And it says here that simulaurin is a plant-derived mixture of polyphenolic flavonoids originating from the fruit and alkenes of Silybum minarum, and contains 3 flavonoligans, silibinins, simulacristin, and silidionin, along with toxopholin. Silibins are the major constituents in simulaurin with almost 70 to 80% abundance and are accountable for most of the observed therapeutic activity. Simulaurin has also been acknowledged from the ancient period and is utilized in European and Asian systems of traditional medicine for treating various liver disorders. The contemporary literature reveals that simulaurin is employed significantly as a neuroprotective, hepatoprotective, cardioprotective, antioxidant, anti-cancer, anti-diabetic, antiviral, anti-hypertensive, immunomodulator, anti-inflammatory, photoprotective, and detoxification agent by targeting various cellular and molecular pathways, including MAPK, mTOR, beta-catenin, and AKT, different receptors and growth factors, as well as inhibiting numerous enzymes and gene expression of several apoptotic proteins and inflammatory cascades, or cytokines, excuse me. So, as with most of these compounds, there are a whole host and pleiotropic effects on a variety of body systems at the level of transcription factors, protein kinases, receptors, growth factors, enzymes, inflammatory cytokines, apoptotic proteins, as well as many, many other things. Not to minimize hypoxia factor 1 alpha, right? So this is why these plant compounds are so unbelievable, because they don't just affect, one particular, NF kappa B or I don't know, Bax or something like that. It's a very holistic way it affects our body. And I particularly pulled this paper not only because it was a relatively new paper, and it has unbelievable graphics. So this particular graphic is looking at how simulaurin is responsible for protecting the liver from fibrosis and cirrhosis through modulating inflammation, oxidative stress, as well as the immune system, in a way to protect the liver and to help regenerate really the liver and protect it from things that insult the liver and damage the liver, to help protect from fibrosis, which is also known as cirrhosis of the liver, which is a really horrible disease. And if anybody didn't know this, hepatitis C used to be the most common cause of cirrhosis. Now, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or NASH, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, which is basically fatty liver caused by metabolic syndrome, diabetes, obesity, etc., is now the leading cause of cirrhosis in the Western world, at least, and which is horrible. And so people have the ability to get cirrhosis just from having diabetes and being obese. And Similarin and milk thistle help protect against that, as well as protect against neuronal cell death and the formation of certain pathologic conditions such as Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, dementia, etc., by protecting these neurons from cell death, as well as neuroinflammation and oxidative stress. So as you can see here, there are, how do I say this? Inflammation, modulation of the immune system, oxidative stress, insulin resistance, blood glucose, etc. That's why my mentor, one of my mentors, called the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, because the way that the systems are actually damaged, it doesn't matter if it's the neurons, if it's the liver, it's the pancreatic beta cells, if it's, ovarian cells or whatever it is, the target tissue is damaged pretty much in the same ways, right? It's by inflammation and oxidative stress, insulin resistance, and hormone dysregulation. And these compounds have effects on all of those systems at once, which is pretty unbelievable. This is a graphic that I pulled from the same paper that talks about Similarin's effects on cancer. It has effects on cell cycle, on its proliferation status through various pro-growth pathways, cancer-related inflammation, angiogenesis, and its ability to restore apoptosis. In addition to that, we've talked about milk thistle from the glutamine side as well, being able to block some of the key transporters such as SLC1A5, a glucose transporter that's upregulated in cancer. So Silimarin is pretty unbelievable. You'll also see Silimarin and milk thistle when I start to talk about the actual blocking of glycolysis, or things that block the actual Warburg effect once we get into the cell. We're mostly talking about things that are outside the cell by lowering blood glucose at this point. But we'll next step in after we talk about and we exhaust kind of as many natural things as we can to lower blood glucose, to lower your GKI. We'll then talk about things that actually lower the Warburg effect or shut down the Warburg effect. And Similarin and milk thistle will also be seen in those videos as well. But since we're talking about blood glucose, we're going to also talk about this graphic here, which is very similar mechanisms to what we've seen from several other compounds. We see that it has decreases in inflammation that can damage pancreatic beta cells, oxidative stress, which can damage pancreatic beta cells, as well as affecting the pancreatic beta cells' ability to detect blood glucose through a variety of mechanisms, as well as enhancing sirtuin systems and AMPK, and to enhance or block apoptosis depending on the need of the cell. It's also going to help shut down excess amounts of hepatic glucose production through hepatic gluconeogenesis as well. So as we can see here, a multi mechanistic approach of how Similarin has its effects on blood glucose. Now, I did want to, as stated here in this particular graphic, it shows here that silibinins are the major constituents of Silimarin or milk thistle, and that's where the majority of the therapeutic activity comes from. I found this paper here called "The Role of Similarin in Cancer Treatment: Facts, Hypotheses, and Questions," and I basically pulled it for the graphics, and it says here again, the average composition of milk thistle is about 60 to 70% silibinin, as well as a bunch of other flavonoids. And I wanted to mention here, it says it also has small amounts of quercetin and apigenin and naringenin and other flavonoids, right? But just very small amounts compared to its main constituent, which is silibinin. And you'll see that when we pulled the papers on milk thistle, particularly for its effects on glutaminolysis and blocking glucose uptake within cancer cells, the papers were titled, silibinin. So just to let you know that silibinins make up about 60 to 70% of the entire plant. And then, there's other isosilibinins as well that make up another portion of the extract itself. So this is a newer paper that was published just recently in October of 2024, and it says silibinin as a major component of milk thistle seeds provides promising influences against diabetes and its complications, a systemic review. And it says here that silibinin, a polyphenolic flavonoid and the main active component of silymarin, isolated from the seeds of milk thistle plant, it has been shown to have antioxidant, anti-neoplastic, hepatoprotective, neuroprotective, anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial, and anti-diabetic effects. Silibinin has been shown to improve diabetic conditions through a variety of mechanisms, including reducing insulin resistance, IR, lowering reactive oxygen species, ROS levels, affecting glycolysis. We'll talk about that at length when we talk about glycolysis and the Warburg effect, gluconeogenesis, and glycogenolysis. And then silibinin treatment reduced blood glucose levels, oxidative stress markers, antioxidant cytokines, anti-inflammatory cytokines, while increasing glycosylated hemoglobin. I'm guessing they meant decreasing glycosylated hemoglobin. Sorry, I have to kind of narrate for the authors here. And antioxidant marker levels in various cellular and animal models of diabetes. It ameliorated levels of triglyceride, cholesterol, LDL, HDL. Furthermore, silibinin has been identified as an effective treatment for diabetic complications, including hepatic damage, endothelial dysfunction, neuropathy, nephropathy, retinopathy, and osteoporosis. The promising anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, anti-diabetic, and insulin sensitizing activities of silibinin were also supported in clinical studies. And this is one of those compounds where we actually have quite a lot of studies showing its effects on A1C and fasting blood glucose, which is promising. I don't know why we don't have the same robust amounts of literature for sulforaphane, but I'm just going to digress again on that. So let me think about this. So when we think about ways that diabetes is horrible for us, okay, we think about probably first and foremost, we think about its effects on our cardiovascular system, okay, diabetic-induced vascular dysfunction or endothelial dysfunction, which can lead to heart attacks and strokes. Again, when I was going through medical school, if you had diabetes, it was equivalent to having a prior acute myocardial infarction or having coronary artery disease equivalent, basically. It's that, that the relationship is that strong between the two conditions. But, one of the most common causes of chronic kidney disease nowadays is uncontrolled hypertension and uncontrolled diabetes. So it has effects on protecting the kidneys against diabetic nephropathy, diabetic retinopathy or eye disease associated with diabetes, diabetic encephalopathy. Basically, diabetes, Alzheimer's disease sometimes is also called type 3 diabetes because of the relationship between impaired glucose tolerance, insulin resistance, and dementia. And then it has direct effects on the liver, which is why diabetes can lead to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and even cirrhosis. And it has also protective effects against diabetic-induced osteoporosis as well. So it has a holistic way of protecting us from diabetes and its complications, which I think is pretty cool. Now, when milk thistle is studied with these diabetics, this paper is titled Simularn in Type 2 Diabetes Mellitus, a systemic review and meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials. This one was published in 2016. We see there in this systemic review and meta-analysis, including 5 randomized controlled trials and 270 patients, routine Simularn administration determines a significant reduction in fasting blood glucose levels of 26.86 milligrams per deciliter. So that's a huge amount of fasting blood glucose and an A1C of 1.07%, which I was very surprised about the strength of milk thistle's ability to lower your A1C level and fasting blood glucose. That's a very powerful effect. That's probably as powerful or more powerful than metformin and other pharmaceuticals. So it's pretty unbelievable. Now, there are newer meta-analyses. There was one published in 2022. This one was titled The Effects of Simularn on the Features of Cardiometabolic Syndrome in Adults, a Systemic Review and Meta-Analysis. And showed that this had a basically Simularn had an effect of reducing the levels of fasting blood glucose by 17.96 and A1C by 1.25%, which is unbelievable good. In this particular meta-analysis. So the last meta-analysis used 5 randomized controlled trials. This one had 11 randomized controlled trials. So this was actually a stronger meta-analysis, and it showed actually a stronger A1C of 1.25% decrease in A1C, which is awesome. And then this particular meta-analysis, which was published just in March of 2024, showed up to 33 different trials, so even a stronger meta-analysis. And again, it solidified the A1C decrease as, let me see here, where is it? Of 0.85%, looking at all the literature, probably all the literature available at that time. So this is the lowest amount, but it's also the strongest meta-analysis, and it showed a 0.85% decrease in A1C, which is really, really good. It lowered fasting blood glucose by 21.68 milligrams per deciliter, which is also a really excellent change. You know, what would happen if your blood glucose on average was 21 points lower? You know, how's that going to affect your GKI? Well, it's going to affect your GKI, your glucose ketone index, by a significant amount. So, you know, Simulaurin or milk thistle is a very powerful addition to our programs here, and it does take up a rather important place within programs that I put together a lot of times, because not only does it have an effect, such a profound effect at lowering blood glucose and blood A1C levels and insulin levels, et cetera, but it also has other effects on glycolysis and shutting down the Warburg effect. It has other effects on glutamine as well. And then, you know, some of the things that, you know, that potentially could be used in combination with, you know, ketogenic metabolic therapy could be things like, you know, mebendazole or something like that. And mebendazole, although generally regarded as very safe, even at very high doses, you know, can potentially have liver damaging effects. And that's one of the reasons why they want clinicians to be checking transaminases fairly routinely when on high doses of mebendazole. You know, you're going to have hepatic protective effects, you know, which is kind of the thing that I would say Simulaurin and milk thistle is most well known for, is effects on liver protective effects, right? So you're also going to help likely protect the liver, even when taking things that potentially could be damaging to the liver, such as mebendazole or other things, right? Another thing that we sometimes would employ within metabolic therapy would be the use of statins. Again, not a huge fan of statins for preventive medicine or cholesterol lowering, but when for a very specific goal or specific, you know, short amount of time to enhance metabolic therapy, statins can be employed. Well, statins, one of the main things that they can do, other than statin, you know, induced myalgias and myopathies, is elevations in transaminases and kind of liver damage. So therefore, you know, the addition of Simulaurin or milk thistle to a program is going to help hopefully protect against that, as well as having its other pleiotropic effects on the entire cancer system as a whole. Now, this particular slide, again, showed its effects on cell cycle, proliferation through growth pathways, inflammation, et cetera, enhancing apoptosis, all things that we want to, you know, have on our side. But again, looking at it from a metabolic lens, it's not that we don't care about these things. We definitely want these things to be going for us if we can get them going for us, but we want to look at its way to enhance metabolic therapy, which is the lowering of blood glucose, lowering of the Warburg effect, as well as lowering of glutamine, which Simulaurin and milk thistle has profound effects on. So it's really kind of a rock star within the metabolic approach to cancer, really, because of its profound effects on all the things that we really care about, both glucose and glutamine, as well as these other pleiotropic effects. And I think it, you know, if it's not already part of your program, it may not be a bad idea to talk to your local integrative doctor who's hopefully like-minded and looking out for you from a holistic standpoint, and talk to them about adding, you know, milk thistle to your program as a really a beneficial addition to your program. So I'm going to take a look at some of these comments here, and then we're going to close out for the day because we're already an hour and, well, I guess about an hour in. A lot of comments here. Give me 1 second. Any contraindications to systemic enzymes? I don't know enough about it to really comment, to be honest with you. I don't know yet. 800 milligram is too low in your opinion? Okay, I will increase dose. They must produce some chatter between people. Yes, it's low. Thanks. I'll have a look. There's just a lot of good collaboration between folks here in the comments. I'm looking for questions here. This is an interesting comment. In raw broccoli, it has about 44 to 171 milligrams of sulforaphane per 100 grams of mature broccoli. For broccoli sprouts, you'll be surprised that you'll see they contain as much as 1,150 milligrams of sulforaphane. Yes, but remember, going back to our slides here, not to rehash the past here, but look at this. Broccoli sprouts have anywhere from 336 to 1430, 83. I guess that's micrograms per gram. So you have to calculate that per 100 grams like you were looking at. But it seems to be maybe broccoli sprouts aren't even as good as Brussels sprouts in terms of sulforaphane content, total sulforaphane content, which was kind of surprising to me. Oh, yeah. I mean, someone's mentioning here Similarin lowers hypertension or improves hypertension. Maybe a better way to say it. Yeah, I mean, I'm not even looking at it from the other perspectives, right? If you looked at most of these papers looking at its cardiometabolic effects, it has effects on cholesterol, blood pressure, all kinds of other stuff, triglycerides, et cetera. So I'm not trying to minimize those things. Obviously we want to look at all those things, but considering this is the cancers and metabolic disease, video, I'm looking at things that really are affecting what we're trying to look at as being kind of keeping our eye on the prize, which is lowering blood glucose, lowering glutamine, et cetera. Any milk thistle contraindications? Well, not that I'm aware of. I don't know of any milk thistle contraindications, but that doesn't mean there aren't any. It just means that probably need to look into that. I have not seen it really showing any negative effects. Yeah, and someone's saying no here, and someone's saying not a single one. I believe that. I think that milk thistle is going to be mostly beneficial, probably little or no harm. Doesn't mean there's no harm if you take excess amounts, maybe potentially, I think the dose makes the toxin, but not that I've seen. It seems to have mostly beneficial effects, at least the dosages we're giving. Yeah, I have not, I'm not as much on board with the TUDCA. Someone had commented, I've heard a lot of people take CUDCA for liver when on Fenbin and Menbin. If I take Similarin, is TUDCA still necessary? Well, first of all, that's a conversation between your doctor. But if it was me, I don't see a reason for TUDCA when you have Similarin on board, just because Similarin is, not only does it have effects on liver protective, but it also has so many other effects that we're looking for metabolic syndrome, which is, again, lowering blood glucose, lowering the Warburg effect, lowering glutamine availability. It just seems like that claims to be the clear winner. That doesn't mean there couldn't be synergistic effects between TUDCA and Similarin. I just don't use TUDCA clinically, and I haven't seen as many beneficial effects as a whole from that compared to TUDCA. So that's my gestalt on it so far. That doesn't mean I can't study it more and find more things out. So just a little bit of a side note. So whatever reason, when I set up the live stream today, I mistakenly selected streaming software instead of my local camera and microphone. So I could not figure out a way to change it back to the normal way that I host these lives. So that's why the initial stream was abandoned and I had to create a new stream. I'll try to transmit all the other information over here, or try to maybe merge them or something like that, so that that I get to keep the thumbnail and stuff like that. But yeah, there was kind of an issue with the system, the back end of the system, which is why I was late to the live stream. I had to abandon that first stream. But anyway, if you like videos like this, if you like the information that's presented here and you think it can affect your glucose, your GKI, and your metabolic therapy as a whole, please like it. If you know people who could utilize this information to help enhance their metabolic therapy, please share it with them. And until next time. Second question, what's the next video about? We're going to keep hammering the blood glucose. The next video will be about the use of fiber and probiotics as a way to lower blood glucose to affect your GKI.